Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Leadership series organized by Cyber Houston. We are excited to have you join us today. Today's topic is cyber intelligence and the critical controls needed to practice good cyber intelligence. We'll get into what is cyber threat intelligence, what are cybersecurity controls, why is cyber intelligence important and how it is to be used, what are the types of threat intelligence, what does a cyber intelligence analyst do, and what skills an intelligence analyst need. So please do post your questions and comments in the chat section and we will answer them live. I am Umesh Verma, CEO of Blue Lance and founder of Cyber Houston. Cyber Houston is a Department of Homeland Security recognized ISAO, Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. We are a coalition of volunteer business, cybersecurity, academic, government, and civic leaders. Our goal is to continuously educate and inform business leaders on how to manage and govern cybersecurity risk. Joining us today is Richard Martin, Managing Partner from Sentinel Intelligence. Let's welcome Richard. Richard, it's so great to have you on our broadcast today.
I appreciate that, Umesh. Thank you for having me.
And Richard, I see this wonderful Batman suit in the back. You want to share a couple of things personal things about you that our audience might enjoy?
Yeah, so you can see the suit of armor behind me, but that's my second suit of Batman armor. I've actually got another suit sitting in our security operations center, kind of hovering over our security analysts, keeping watch on things as we go forward. But that's not it. You know, I'm a kind of a all-around geek and nerd. So I've actually got 3 Starfleet uniforms. And I want to be clear on this, Umesh. They're not costumes. These are uniforms. So just want to get that out of the way.
Well, I would love to see you actually suited up in your uniform. So, but that's awesome. And you also build Raspberry Pi robots and stuff.
So one of the things that we tell our analysts and anybody kind of entering this industry is that in order to be really good at this industry, you got to do a lot of different things, right? You got to know a lot about a lot of different things. So one of the things that I do on the side, you know, on the weekends and off time is I like to tinker with Arduino kits and Raspberry Pi robots and things like that. You know, it's coding, it's you know, understanding how things work. And for me, it's very intellectually satisfying, but it's also serving a need as learning, continuing my learning experience with, you know, code and hardware and how all those things interact.
Awesome. So we have so much to cover. And so let's just get right into it. So for our audience, let's start out with the basic question. What is cyber threat intelligence and what are the cybersecurity controls and why it's so important?
Yeah, so back when I started in this industry, we called it information security, and that was basically it. And it really revolved around protecting the data and the data that was in the organization. And you know, I'm old enough to know that even meant protecting stuff in file cabinets, right? So that has morphed into this overall thing called, you know, cybersecurity. Well, there's a subset of that that we look at, and I know we did not coin the term, but this thing about, you've heard about threat intelligence. Well, we also want to talk about cyber intelligence as well. And what we mean by cyber intelligence, and one of the reasons why we named the company the way we did, is we just don't want to focus on one aspect of, you know, cybersecurity. It really involves bringing a lot of pieces of information together, whether that is, from the digital world or from the human, you know, aspect of systems. So all of that combined, if we can design an intelligent way to look at all those things holistically, then we think organizations can be better prepared for what they face now and in the future. So it's not necessarily following a compliance, you know, checklist. It's more about understanding where your risk exposure is, what the consequences of those risks are, providing adequate mitigations, and really getting comfortable with the risk assessment process.
So you have a great presentation for our audience today. So if you are ready, are you ready with your screen share and ready to do your presentation? And for our audience, while Richard's bringing up his presentation, feel free to post your questions along the way. Make sure that you ask your questions. We will try and answer the questions as we go along. So with that, over to you, Richard.
All right, thank you, Umesh. Yeah, so today what I really want to talk about is critical controls. And critical controls mean different things to different people, to different organizations, especially when they come, when you're talking about, cyber risk and cybersecurity. So one of the first things I want to do is really define what a control is, right? This is kind of Richard's definition of a control. It's a process or processes, manual or automated, that prevent or detect a risk that threatens the attainment of an objective, right? And that's all really a control is. We're just trying to control a risk that threatens the attainment of an objective. So one of the examples that I use is, all organizations have an objective, and they have this specific objective, right? This isn't the only objective, but they have this objective that only those that need logical access have said access, right? So that's an objective every organization has, but there's risks to that, to obtaining that objective, right? You've got your users share their account information, password sharing, what have you. They get phished and give up their credentials, right? That's a risk. Terminating employees do not get removed and still have accounts on systems. Hacking of user accounts and passwords on a system, and users that are changing job roles, right? And then we get into privilege creep. And so those are your inherent risks that would prevent you from achieving that objective. Now, I know that there's probably 1,000 more, but want to focus on this group right quick, because it really goes into the presentation and what we're seeing out in the field. And so when we talk about risk and controls, what we're really talking about is preventive and detective controls. Now, I'm a CISSP, CISA, CIA, I've got all of those certifications as well. And depending on what exam you're about, not only preventive and detective controls, but you're going to also get corrective. You're going to get a whole slew of differing controls, right? That these organizations, and they're really great organizations, say need to be in place. Well, I'm going to tell you, all of them boil down to two, and that's preventive and detective. That is to say, how do you prevent a risk from coming to fruition? And if it does, how would you detect that, right? That's the only two that you need to know, and that's really where the intelligence comes in about it. But let's look at this objective and these risks specifically. So again, the objective is only those that need logical access have that access. So let's take a look at the user share account information, right? So you have a situation where the risk is that users share logical access authentication accounts, right? Well, what do you do to prevent that? Well, one of the things that you can do is training, right? So you have a preventive control in there that says, hey, you shouldn't do that because it's bad. You may also have policy, right? The policy within itself is not a control. The training to the policy is a control, right? So those could be both preventive controls. You could also change passwords every 3 months. That could be a form of a preventative control. On the detective side, what would you do to detect that? Well, you could conduct audits, right? You could conduct logical access audits, which we will get into later on in the presentation. But really, what we're talking about is preventive and detective controls. And so, now that that's out of the way, what I really want to focus on now is what Sentinel sees out in the wild, out in the field. Right. And so last year we did a number of penetration tests, right? And for the most part, we're successful in all the penetration tests that we do to a certain extent, right? But we started to gather stats on where are we being successful at. In other words, what risks are not controlled in the internal environment that allows us to hack an organization. right? So we started looking at backup and recovery. We started looking at network segmentation. We started looking at patch management, sensitive file shares, and domain admin, right? And so what we found is 18% of the organizations that we pen tested and are queried did not have a backup strategy. And the converse to that is, 72% did, or 82% did, right? What that doesn't say is what their strategy is. If their strategy is, well, we're going to back up all of our file shares to a local NAS device on the same network, is that really an effective strategy? Well, we can talk about that, but at least they had a strategy, some sort of strategy. A really big one is that 87% of organizations do not have network segmentation. In other words, they don't have proper VLAN set up. So that if I walk into an organization and say they've got a guest wireless access point available and it's open, or even if I need to go up to the receptionist and grab the, password for the day or whatever it is, from there, I can traverse the guest network to get back to the secure internal resources, right? That's what we talk about network segmentation. There's no access control list at the switch level. And that's 80% of the time. 75% of all organizations are missing patches. And these aren't like little one-offs. These are critical patches. The Microsoft DNS thing that happened last year, Bluekeep, all of those really nasty ones that we hear about, 75% of organizations that we pen test are missing critical patches. Here's the next two are really big and really surprised us, right? So again, over 40 organizations, 48% of those had available file shares for users that did not necessarily need access to those file shares. So what that means is if I'm in IT and I have an AD account and I have access to a certain segment of file shares, I can actually traverse and get to HR data. I can get to CEO data, right? There's no controls, or there's very little controls on the file shares themselves. And somebody that can just, quickly YouTube a video on how to traverse Active Directory file shares will find that, right? You'll be able to traverse those file shares. 48% of the organizations allowed just kind of open-ended file share access. The big one, the granddaddy of them all, 52% of the time, over half last year. So we're talking 22 to 23 organizations that we pen tested. We were able to gain domain administrative access. And we're not talking, this was some custom malware from the boffins at MIT, right? These are just things that you can do to get domain admin. And most of the time they were leaking, fog deployments were leaking credentials. We even saw one where the printers were set up with domain admin credentials because that's the only way they could get the printers to work on the network, right? So 52% of the time we get domain admin. And for the folks on this webinar, I don't have to tell you that if I get domain admin, right, that's game over. I own you at that point. Forget about the file shares, forget about the segmentation. If I just get domain admin, I've got keys to the kingdom, and I can keep going. So, but one of the, we do these assessments, and what we pride ourselves in is when we go in and do these assessments, it's not a fire and forget. In other words, we don't do the seagull method where we swoop in, say a lot of things, crap on everything, and then fly out, right? We try to produce, corrective actions for these guys, and then we follow up with them. But we know that time is valuable, right? So there's analysis that goes into it. There's planning. There's scheduling of the corrective actions, and then there's the execution of the corrective actions, and then there's the follow-up. So there's a lot that has to be done, usually in a very short period of time, because these are critical issues that we are discovering. So one of the things when we talk about critical controls, obviously I led with logical access, and I'm going to keep hammering on this because I think it's overlooked a lot of times, right? We talk about the insider threat a lot, but I don't think organizations really realize how vulnerable they could be from the inside on this. So when we talk about logical access, some of the things that you want to check are Active Directory, You want to make sure that your domain admin privileges are only for those who need it, right? And they're not, just kind of floating out there. I remember pen testing an organization where they had over, 50 domain admin accounts. I mean, that's not good for anything. There's no reason why you would need that many accounts. Set up your service accounts. If you've got service accounts, set those up in a way that they don't have domain admin and they only do a specific thing, right? File shares as well. You want to take a look at those file shares. Any kind of information systems that you have, whether you've got an overall ERP, you want to be looking at logical access. You want to be looking at those privileges for sure. Backup and recovery. Where is your data, right? What data is it that you need to back up? And really where this starts with is data classification. Have you classified your data? Do you know what data you're trying to protect so that if your systems do get ransomware or your systems do go down, you can recover your most valuable data on that? And where is that at? And so taking that inventory, we believe is a big critical control. Physical security, network closets, data centers, computer labs, any open areas in the organization where we can gain a foothold, right, physically. You want to take that into your risk assessment calculations and design controls around there. I can't tell you how many organizations have switches set up in janitor closets, right? And all we have to do is traverse into a janitor closet, drop a device on the switch, and we've got access that we can start, attacking the network from the inside. End user training. This is huge. Again, I don't think it gets enough, bandwidth as far as, what organizations need to focus on, but this end user training is huge. There are stats out there that say 80 to 90% of all hacks come from end users, right? So that is, they've either been phished, they've using the same credentials they do at work on their Facebook account or on their Pinterest account or whatever. So, end user training to try to mitigate some of that stuff. And your executives have a different risk variable for that. So most executives that I know, their admins have access to their email and some of their accounts, right? So they need to be trained in a different way. I don't necessarily have to go after Umesh, the CEO. I can just go after his admin, right? And maybe his admin doesn't have the level of training that Umesh has, right? So you want to keep that in mind. Patch management. This goes without saying. I think it's a no-brainer, right? Mission critical servers, firewalls, core network devices, everything needs to have the latest patches installed. Yesterday, MS Isaac put out an advisory for Microsoft patches. You need to apply those patches. Here's the thing: if you've got a WSA server and it's just sitting there, and you're going to rely on your WSA server, how do you know that it's getting everything it needs to get? I remember a couple of years ago when a critical patch by Microsoft came out, or a critical vulnerability from Microsoft came out, but there was it didn't come down with Patch Tuesday. It didn't come down via the WSA server. It was actually, you had to manually apply it, right? So there are those things that happen out there. And of course, endpoint protection. Can't stress this enough: modern anti-malware protection. There's a number of great companies that provide it out there, but do not rely on just Windows Defender alone. Any one of these in isolation only catch about 80% of the malware, so it's best to run them in tandem on that. I'm not telling you need to go out and get the latest Cisco firepower, where you can detonate malware in a VM and all of that, but you need to have good modern anti-malware on-prem, on your endpoints. So here's the key, right? Focus on the risk and stay focused on the risk. And once you focus on those risks, then turn your attention to those controls, right? So logical access audits. Let's talk about how we can conduct a logical access audit. So a lot of organizations that we engage with, they just tell us point blank, look, we do not have the time to go through 1,000 Active Directory accounts to figure out if they're in the right OU or whatever. Well, you don't have to do that, right? All you really need to do is pull a sample. pull about 10% of your users, make it a random sample, but just pull 10%, and then vouch that sample back, right? You want to compare it against things like current employees. Is this account active, and does this person still work here? You also want to compare it against their privileges, right? What privileges should they have considering their role versus what they actually have, right? And then document your findings and report. And here's what I'm telling you: 10% of the if you sample 10% of the accounts, and in that you sample that 10%, let's say it's 100 accounts, and you have one issue, right? Does that mean that you're issue free? No, but what it would tell me is that you're headed in the right direction. If you want to continue down that path, pull another 10% and vouch that back, right? You don't have to do a complete, 100% audit of those things. Now, if you pull a sample of 100 users and 40 of those have issues, you probably, that will indicate that you've got a problem, right? And so you'll want to go back and actively look for, or do a complete audit of the accounts. Now, we're not just talking about Active Directory either. If you're using an ERP system, right, those can be very complicated as far as roles and permissions and all of that. Again, pull that sample, make sure the roles are matching up with what the person actually does. One of the things that we like to do is we like to pull a sample, and we like to vouch that against an access authorization of some sort, right? Who signed off that this person could have this access, right? And so there's ways to go about it without spending months combing through every account in your system. You may eventually have to do that, but in the beginning, just pull a small sample. There's lots of great tools that are out there that help you with this. Umesh has a great tool out there. Blue Lance has a great tool that can help you do these types of audits. There are other tools out there that allow you to do these types of audits and help you stay aware of what's going on in your environment. So let's move to backup and recovery right quick. So I told you that only 18% of those that we went on site for did not have a backup and recovery strategy, right? That means that 82% did. But again, that doesn't talk about what the risk is, right? They may have had a strategy, but we weren't convinced that they actually talked through what was needed to make sure their backup and recovery system was working as intended. So the things that we recommend, again, critical controls, you want it physically separate and you want it logically separate, and then you want to test, right? You want to test, I would recommend every 6 months. Things change really quickly, especially in the IT environment. So you want to test restoration every 6 months. I know it's a pain, but test it, document your testing, and then go from there. We get a lot of questions about what do we mean by logically separate? Well, in other words, don't back up the file system that you're backing up to the same file system that you're backing up. We've actually run into that, right? So if your file system gets ransomware, your backups get ransomware, right? You want that logically separate. Ideally, if you've got the resources, you want to do some sort of cloud migration of that to a completely different environment. But test that as often as you can to make sure that it's working as intended. End user awareness training, right? So this is huge. You want to train, you want to test, you want to track, and you want to hold accountable. That last bit is the kicker for everyone, right? So there are really great tools out there that allow you to test your end users and actually phish them. One that does really well is KnowBe4. So you can actually set it up as administrator of KnowBe4. You can phish your users. If they fail the phishing test, you can pop them right into remedial training. There's another one by Security IQ, I believe. So there's tools out there that help you do that, right? But here's the thing. If you are training and testing your users and you're tracking that and you get a failure rate of say 20 to 30%, what keeps them from failing it again, right? You have to hold them accountable to that. So we recommend getting with your HR department and coming up with some sort of scale. Like, if you fail more than 5 times, you're going to have some sort of write-up, right? It seems harsh, but again, 80 to 90% of all hacking events happen because of poor end user awareness. And so keep that in mind. Again, another key critical control. Quarterly patch management. For this group, I know it goes without saying, right? You want to make sure that your systems are patched, up to the latest versions. Now, I know organizations that will not patch as soon as patches come out, and that's fine, right? You may have I'm going to wait a week and see what's going on with this patch before I deploy it to my production environment. There are other organizations that have the resources to spin up a test environment so they can test it before they roll it into production, right? But not doing anything is not the answer. I was reading an article this morning that the patch for the Microsoft vulnerability for Exchange that came out last month. The FBI, as screaming as loud as they could, just took matters in their own hands now. They're now just actively shutting down the back doors, right? And they won't even tell you about it. They'll just log into your system and shut down your back door because patches are not getting applied the way they should. What we recommend for patch management is, and if we have any executives on this talk, is you need to ask yourself, if your IT director is saying, yes, we patch regularly, you need to ask yourself, how do I know, right? What am I getting that tells me that these guys are actually patching the environment? They'd be more than happy to provide you ad nauseum with all the documentation that you need. But the flip side to that is they may be applying the patches, but like those manual patches, what are they missing, right? So are you conducting internal vulnerability scans looking for those missing patches, right? Because with that Microsoft Exchange hack that happened last month, we were advising our clients that if you had Microsoft Exchange on premise, consider yourself compromised. I mean, it was that clear cut. If you had it in your environment, it was you were hosed, so to speak. So a lot of organizations patch that, but as an executive, how do you know they patched that, right? How do you know that there's still not a backdoor into your system? So, again, plan for end of life as well. If you've got any Windows 2012 server sitting out there, you guys need to be planning for end of life on that. Review the patch level, inventory server and equipment, document your finding, research all the patches. It's again an intelligence gathering thing. So that is pretty much it for my presentation on critical controls and everything I think is important. So now I'll turn it back over to you, Umesh, and you can walk me through the next steps.
Right. So I think you gave a great overview of cyber intelligence, the controls, all the way from logical access, physical access, etc. I think we, so there are many, for our viewers, we have different types of viewers. We have some that are very sophisticated, very technical, and then there are some that are business leaders, academic leaders, government leaders. I get this question all the time, Richard, is that how do people find me? How do they figure out that I'm available to be picked on?
Oh, so that's a great question. And yeah, they're not picking on y'all specifically, right? Most of the time, unless you're in the defense industry, unless you're in like high-end research industry, say an MIT or a Cal Poly or something like that, you're not necessarily getting picked on. Usually the way that you get picked on is botnets. Botnets are crawling the internet 24/7, 365. And these botnets are looking for certain things. Some of them are looking for everything, right? Some of them are looking for a specific way in. And so if a botnet does detect that you have this vulnerability on your perimeter, or you've got a weakness in your perimeter, it's going to report back to what we call a C2 server, or a command and control server. And then once it does that, then you actually get the guys running the botnet that will actually start hacking the perimeter and the environment itself. It's not necessarily, 90% of the time you're not getting there. Not everything's an advanced persistent threat, right? Most of the time it's botnet driven.
So botnets are sitting out there busy pinging around. If you've got a public facing website, or you got any public-facing domains, definitely a no-no. And people do that and set that up a lot of times, especially in small and mid-sized organizations, just for a matter of convenience, right?
I will say this, that if you want to understand like how botnets operate, one of the sites you can visit is Shodan.io. Right. So it collects a lot of that site. It has a botnet, right? It goes out and it finds stuff. And one of the things that I love about Shodan is it's a great open source intelligence tool. So before we even engage with a client, we can go to Shodan and pull up all this great intel about a client. They've got webcams, looking out at the parking lot and stuff. Well, maybe they left their default credentials in place when they set up those webcams. So we can see all that stuff from Shodan, but it's infinitely, searchable. So I urge all this group, if you've not been to Shodan.io, go to Shodan.io. The other one that I'll mention is haveibeenpwned.com, right? Haveibeenpwned.com is a great tool for organizations that not sure if their domain may have been compromised, or their users' information, their credentials have been leaked. You can go to haveibeenpwned.com, type in your domain, and it will tell you whether that domain has been involved in a breach, in a data breach of some sort. So there's some really great open source intelligence tools sitting out there to figure out if you may have a problem before you even start down that road.
So if you go out and you do this assessment, what does that conversation begin to look like? You show a customer 18% if they have no strategy, 87% don't even have segmentation, 75% have no organized patch management, 48% have available file shares, which is they're making their file systems available to the open public. And then 52% misuse domain admin credentials, or really have no proper controls around the use and distribution and giving people domain access or equivalents. So what does that conversation look like with the business on the other side, and how do you translate your findings into policy, and what does policy begin to look like?
Yeah, so it's a tough conversation, right? It's a tough conversation because what we have to do is translate geek speak into something that executives understand, right? And so the way that we go about it is we translate geek speak, threats and vulnerabilities and surfaces and attack vectors. We translate all that into risk. And most executives and most higher ups, they understand risk, and what they're really focused on is, it depends on the organization, exactly what they're doing. If they're e-commerce, obviously, they could lose thousands of dollars a minute if their systems go down. But for most organizations, especially if we're talking to CEOs, right, we're talking about reputational exposure primarily, right? And once we mention reputational risk, then you see eyes light up, and then we start walking them through. Okay, imagine if I'm an attacker and I walk in and I'm targeting you, and I just walk into your building and I hook up to your guest wireless. Here's all the things I can do, and if I get domain admin on your environment, here are some more things I can do. Maybe I hold you hostage with all your legal memos that don't shine a good light on, the organization, or maybe there's some HR reports sitting in the file shares that, don't really shed good light on certain things. And so once we start going down that road with executives, you can see the light bulb coming on, and they start understanding what kind of risk exposure they have on that. And to their credit, most CEOs get that, right. They understand they've got a lot going on. They've got to worry about financial risk. They got to worry about product risk. They got to worry about a lot of risk, right? And then here come the geeks, and then we've got geek related risk associated with that. But it's so prevalent now that most CEOs and most boards understand that. In fact, if there's anybody on that's got like an audit committee that you're a part of or that you have to report to, audit committees are really starting to take this seriously. I know years ago, back in the early 2000s, there was Sarbanes-Oxley in Section 404, where the SEC actually mandated, these types of controls needed to be put in place. Well, if you've got an audit committee, they're really starting to take a hard look at these cyber controls on that. So it's kind of a tough conversation to get going, but once you start translating it from geek speak to risk, the conversation starts flowing at that point.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point you bring up about the audit committee. I had a friend of mine who 2 years ago, he's the CEO of a public company, and he said to me, "Umesh, you keep talking about cybersecurity risk, but we don't really hear about this at the audit committee level yet. And what you need to do is focus in on educating the audit committee." He kept telling me, because he understood cybersecurity risk, but he felt like audit committees were not really talking about it. So about a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to be on a call with him. And one of the first things he said is, "Well, you know what? My audit committee can't stop talking about cybersecurity risk."
Right. Exactly.
So it just shows you how the timeline.
Especially when you're talking about, for-profit companies, right? You start talking to the audit committee and you start talking about internal technology controls that, prevent and or detect issues with a balance sheet, right? Their ears start to perk up, right? Maybe they've got shareholders they need to answer to. So yeah, it's a huge thing. It's a big thing nowadays.
And I think you bring up a big point right in that statement that you just made, is that for a long time we were focused in on external risk. And now it's about hardening your internal controls, because you can get in, externally you can get in, and anybody can get in if they really have the tools. And then it's about how do they take over logical access? How do they masquerade as other people's highly credentialed users, etc. And so internal controls become very important in that stage.
No, I completely agree, and becoming more and more. We've seen this shift from external perimeter controls for organizations, right? The publicly facing IPs. We've seen the shift away from that being the main issue to the internal users being the main issue. Now, even if we go into the organization who've never had any kind of cybersecurity work done at all, usually the perimeter is we can secure that. There's some really low-hanging fruit most of the time, and we can secure that right away. But then you go inside, and there's so many vectors of attack for an organization internally. If we're engaged to do a pen test, we're lazy. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to phish, the end users, right? And so if we can gain a foothold there, great. If not, maybe we do go on site and we visit to see how their physical security is. So yeah, it has absolutely moved from external controls to the internal controls.
So you spoke about the Microsoft Exchange on-prem risk, and right before that, there was this whole conversation about the SolarWinds hack and what that really meant, and the distribution, to 80,000 plus clients worldwide, and what that risk is. So I think we have
so far as we know.
yeah, and it spreads from there, right? And the issue of it still being latent and mutating and changing. So. And we have analyzed the SolarWinds hack a lot, but the question on this on the Cybersecurity Leadership series, but the question I really want to kind of ask you is, what is that impact of the SolarWinds hack from expectations regarding regulations, process changes as a result of the hack? Because it's going to start, I think, affecting not just security software vendors, but all security application vendors and hardware vendors and all kinds of other processes.
Yeah, so So if it wasn't so damn diabolical, it's brilliant, right? The way that they went about doing that, they compromised an update server, right? And of course, the cover story is that there was an intern that had the password of the update server at password 123 or something like that. And the first thing I've got to ask is, why is an intern accessing the update server, right? I mean, where were your password controls on that? So, from the SolarWinds perspective, we're not going to really know how deep that hack runs, right? For years, we're just not ever. We may never know because it was going on for so long and was so persistent. And remember when I was talking about the domain admin, there's so many organizations that gave SolarWinds that service account domain admin privileges, right? So the attackers infiltrate that, they get domain admin, they could be in your network forever unless you go through the hell of resetting all your domain admin passwords. And then, then you got to worry about, well, did they establish a backdoor? Is that all of that? So we're not going to know for years how big that hack really was, in my opinion, because it was going on for so long and it had access to potentially, really devastating account credentials on that. As far as what, the way the hack worked is, they hacked the update server. So when SolarWinds went out and grabbed the update from the update server, you downloaded the hack, right? You downloaded the back door at that point. Now we get into this conversation about zero trust. And do you actually trust that update server? I think we're going to start hearing more and more about that as we go forward. How do you trust that the updates, call me crazy, but how do you know that the updates from Microsoft are actually from Microsoft and are not the Chinese that have planted a backdoor in the Microsoft update servers, right? I don't want to be overly dramatic, but we really have to start looking at this idea of zero trust and how do we validate that the patches that are coming down are actually working. Well, one of the ways that we do that, at least in my world, is you take a SHA-1 or SHA-256 hash of the update and you compare it to the update they published and make sure that those two hashes match, and then you've got some reasonable assurance that they're coming down, that the patch hasn't been tampered with, which that's been a thing in Linux for years. The other thing that I imagine that we'll see, years ago, we used to ask for, on third-party providers, we used to ask for something called a SAS 70, which is third-party assurance of controls. Nowadays, it's called an SSAE 16 SOC 2 audit. I'm sure you guys have heard of that with SOC 1 and SOC 2 and SOC 3 audits and all of that. And basically, all that is you get Deloitte and Touche or somebody that comes into the service provider and they verify that they've got good controls in place, right? And then you can get that documentation as proof that you've conducted due diligence on the third party. I would suspect that probably in the next 5 years, we're going to see an update to that will include protections against, something like SolarWinds, or protect against, Microsoft updates, being tampered with, or I don't know what that will look like. But I would imagine that we will see something like that. As far as the regulatory environment, I don't know how, state legislatures or, even the national, even Congress, United States Congress, would deal with something like that, because at that point, it was such a unique thing that occurred. I can't even begin to speculate on legislation that may come down. My guess is that they'll just throw money at people to make sure that they've got the latest and greatest tools on-prem to protect against that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think, there's always this balance on industry self-regulating itself and then the government getting involved. I just fear that there will be some policies that will come down that could be quite restrictive to entrepreneurship and to small businesses or small business software vendors. Just like what happened with the car and automobile industry. I mean, you put in a lot of it, but there is some other stuff around safety, right? So there is that balance. But we went from almost 100 car companies down to, I think, 4 or 5
Right.
as a result of that, the regulations, but it had to
Right.
be from a safety perspective. So, I think there's this balance, but
Right.
it'll
Right.
be an
Well, I mean,
interesting.
the fact that the FBI is just logging into people's servers now and shutting down back doors. I mean, they're already starting to take an active role in this, right? I mean, that's an active measure against a private entity.
Correct.
They're not asking permission. They're just going in and they're doing it, right? And so you got to ask yourself, is that where we're headed, right? And so I know that we could tangent into the NSA and how much data they already have and all of that, but the fact of the matter is that we've got published reports now, the FBI active measures going into organizations' servers and shutting down a back door. Now you say, well, that's a good thing, right? We want the FBI to protect us, right? And I completely agree with you on that. But where does it stop, right? Where do they delineate that line between, hey, I'm doing this for the good of the country versus I'm going to do this because I think you're up to no good, but I'm going to say it's for the protect. You've got a back door on your system, right? But I'm going to go ahead and rummage around in there, because if you think about that back door in Microsoft Exchange, that back door allowed you to get access to all the emails and all the email credentials and all of that stuff. So they're also probably doing some intel gathering as well. Again, not to be overly dramatic.
Well, interesting times are ahead.
Absolutely.
It's the maturation of our industry, and we were very naive to begin with. But it's like every other technology, you put it out until it becomes pervasive, and then you
agree.
put controls on it, right?
Yeah, and just for the record, if there's any FBI agents on hey, I love you guys.
Well, so let's just take a couple of minutes and talk about. There's a question around over here about WAF WAF to protect clients and etc. But let me come back to let me weave that into this current thought here, which is, the pandemic forced every company to kind of put their workforce out remotely, at least a part of it, if not most of it. And so we brought up the remote workforce, and we've had some issues with remote workforces, especially with everybody doesn't have a VPN connection, didn't have VPN licenses, didn't have, and then other protections, like you said, segmentation, even of routers and wireless routers at homes and sharing of routers, etc. Now we're beginning to talk about planning to bring our workforce back. In that transition, where is that risk on that remote worker? The controls that are needed on that remote worker. Many people are never going to come back to the office. Do you have any opinion about that process?
Yeah. So I mean,
it's here to stay, right? The remote.
Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But I mean, there's risk. So what you have to ask yourself is, what happened at home, right? When these guys start bringing their laptops back, what did they download? What were they doing on their work laptops, right? And I think you got to start there. But understanding that if it's a smaller organization and say you didn't have a VPN tunnel back to your secure environment, then one of the things that you may do is back up the files that the user needs and maybe re-image that device, right? That could be a simple thing on that. It's just it really depends on the organization and what controls you have in place at the organization, right? So your firewall at your organization it could be pfSense for all we know, but pfSense is even more robust than nothing, right? It's more robust than the Spectrum, router. So, if you start seeing, you hook that laptop into your environment and you start getting alerts from your firewall, trying to make outbound connections to stuff you don't even know about, maybe it is time to re-image that machine, or have a talk to the end user and say, okay, how many times did you order stuff on Pinterest? And, go from there.
Yeah, I think so. Tony asked that question, would you recommend WAF to protect the client?
Yeah, so web application firewalls, absolutely. I mean, it's a tool in the arsenal. I mean, if you configure it right, it can save you a lot of headaches. The other thing that I would recommend is uBlock Origin on Chrome browsers. Right, we're seeing a lot of like malicious Chrome extensions these days. And so one of the things that we recommend is, if you've got the ability to block Chrome extensions, do that through Active Directory. We recommend that you do that and have kind of a whitelist of Chrome extensions. We're seeing a lot of that, but uBlock Origin is something else that you can deploy on the Chrome browsers to block that third-party traffic on there. But yeah, web application firewalls, we absolutely support and recommend the use of those when needed. The problem that we've seen and that we run into is if they're not set up correctly, they can actually block needed services and really kind of slow down the environment for the user. So you'll want to play with the configuration in your environment on that.
So Vic Malloy from San Antonio has a very interesting conversation when we were talking about how do people get targeted, and he put up the LinkedIn profiles. I think the whole social media profile area is ripe for a discussion around what one should be protective of, how should one protect oneself, what should you really say, what should you not say, how do you become a target, how do you protect yourself? There's so many things, the whole who, what, where, when, why, how, of not just LinkedIn, but probably your Facebook, your Snapchat, your Instagram.
Right. It's a tough thing. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. I've got, on my Twitter feed, I follow probably 160 cybersecurity experts. And in their feed, they're constantly getting attacked by one, entity or another. And so they, you kind of make yourself a target. What you have to do is, accept that risk, right? If I'm going to put myself out there, then I know I'm going to potentially be a target for someone. The other thing that you can do is, constantly change your passwords in social media so that they don't get access to it. But even at that, I mean, Musk was hacked. Barack Obama was hacked. I think Trump was even hacked. So, you can, other than burying yourself in a bunker, if you put yourself out there, you can expect to have some sort of cyber issues.
Yeah, what we've noticed is that I have a very public LinkedIn profile myself too, and it's kind of grown over the years. And I looked at it yesterday, and someone brought to my attention that I have over 20,000 followers, and I'm like, okay, now do I really know 20,000 people? No, I don't. So what we've done is actually we have a company page and we have a personal page, and we're trying to do some things there. We definitely put MFA on all the accounts. Definitely try to not share the LinkedIn credentials with even other people within the organization. Automation software like Hootsuite and stuff can you've got to give away your credentials to that automation software for it to actually. So this is going to be an interesting period of time, I think, that we have to.
Yeah, I think as far as social media is concerned, for companies, it's a must, right? You have to be out there. Social media is part of the marketing strategy for most companies, and you have to be out there. Now, as far as making yourself a target, try not to say anything bad about the Chinese or the Russians or the Ukrainians, right? Maybe they'll give you a pass, but if they want to attack you, they're going to get you, one way or the other. I mean, we used to say all the time that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? And so, you just prepare yourself for that eventuality, and put your business continuity plan in place when it does happen.
I think another point you brought up, which stuck with me as you were talking through it, was that you talked about doing a random sample of about 10% of the accounts that are out there. That's okay for the larger accounts. I think the ones that have larger, because if you find, like you said, 1% or one individual or one account that is weak, it could have been the CEO's admin account. You kind of brought that up.
Could be.
So that I think you have to look at that. And also, in addition, the attacker only has to be perfect or gain access or break in one time.
One opportunity is
whereas
all
the
it takes.
organization has to be perfect all the time.
Right.
So, when you find that one weakness, are you comfortable with a 10%, or do you ever kind of go back and say, listen, we need to do more of an analysis?
Aha. That is the question, right? So it's not my decision. What I do as a practitioner is present my findings to management and let management tell me where to go, right, and what to do. As an IT practitioner, I don't make strategic calls for the company. That's not my job. My job is to make sure that the users have access to the things they need and that it's protected, right? It's up and running when needed, and that it's secure. So if I do this 10% audit and I go to the COO or CFO or whoever the IT director is reporting to, I say, look, I pulled a 10% sample. Here's what I found. It was 100 accounts that I reviewed. Of those 100 accounts, 3 were no longer employed. 2 additional had wrong privs. What do you want to do from here? Right. This is based on a 10% sample, and then let management make that determination as far as what to do next, right? Do they want to do a full-on audit? And if they do, then it's incumbent upon you to tell them, okay, well, that's a lot of resources, right? Here's what we're going to need to conduct that full audit. And so you start that dialogue. But as an IT practitioner, I don't make that call. If I'm CEO and somebody is presented that to me, I'm going to say, well, that's 5%. That's good enough for me to say, I want you to go review every damn account that we have and make sure there's nothing wrong with it. And as a CEO, that's exactly what I'm going to tell the IT person. The IT person is going to come out of that meeting going, I have no idea how to even begin this. So scoping the audit would be paramount in that case.
So, Richard, this has been an excellent conversation. For our viewers, why don't you tell them a little bit about how they can find you? I know you had your website up there, but how they can find you and what your expertise is. You're really, in addition, you're also a private investigator. Your firm is a licensed private investigation firm.
Yeah. So first of all, sentinelcyberintel.com is our website address. You can find us there. There's a contact page there if you want to get in contact with us. We'd be more than happy to get an email from you guys and respond appropriately when to do so. I'm also on LinkedIn, Richard Martin. You can just find me, Richard Martin, and then put in like private investigator, and I should pop up. Sentinel Cyber Intel is really unique cybersecurity firm. First of all, we're the only cybersecurity firm based in Waco, Texas. No jokes now. We really are. We're the only full service cybersecurity firm based in Waco, Texas. We tend to serve mainly local government entities. That is to say, local, counties, cities, community colleges, and ISDs. Right now, we count over 70 clients statewide that are on our, managed what we call our virtual information security officer platform. And so we manage cybersecurity for them. We're only in the state of Texas. We only deal in the state of Texas because we know all of those rules and regulations there. But yeah, reach out, send me an email. What we tell folks is advice is always free, and we'd be more than happy to chat with you.
So, a very big thank you for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's my pleasure.
And so for our viewers, this presentation will be available on the Cyber Houston Facebook page and the YouTube channel, as well as the cyberhouston.org website. Please do subscribe to our Cyber Houston YouTube channel and follow the Cyber Houston Facebook page. Remember to hit the notification button. That way you'll be notified each time we go live. At Cyber Houston, we take lessons learned from our enterprise members, distill them down into sensible economical guidance to help small and mid-sized businesses improve their cyber posture, build resilience, become better and stronger suppliers back to the enterprise. All done with the lens of helping SMBs grow their business. This guidance comes in the form of the Business Vitality Guide, guidance for the Board of Directors, and the Cyber Preparedness Assessment. which is available in PDF as well as online, and the free cyber scan. All of these resources are free and can be found under the resources tab of the cyberhouston.org website. A very special thank you to our sponsors, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Blue Lance, Reneco Digital, and the University of Houston downtown. Till then, so what I'd like to do is really thank our audience and thank Richard again. And till next week, be safe, stay healthy, and have a great day. Thank you.